numbers in the legislature. You've got 24 Republicans, 10 Democrats in the Senate, 109 and 52 in the House. That'll change after the 8th District congressional race because there's one Democrat legislator running against one Republican legislator out of the House. Here are some priorities in the legislature, the governor's priorities, and then legislative leadership priorities. Medicaid expansion, you've probably heard something about that. That's a priority for the governor. It's not getting a lot of support yet among Republicans. However, the Chamber of Commerce has come out in support of it, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Longer school year, the governor would like to add 6 days to the minimum length of the school year, 174 to 180 days. We have current policy, you'll find it in the book, that says we don't support increasing those number of days, so we want to keep them at 174. Ethics and campaign contribution limits. We have policy supporting campaign contribution limits. Funding for early childhood education, scholarship programs. I'll just talk about the budget for a minute here. You've heard a lot of talk already today about how much reliance we have in Missouri on federal money. Moody's, the rating service, has recently put Missouri, one of 4 states that were downgraded recently in Outlook, changing from stable to negative based on reliance on federal money. So that's something that's going to come into play in terms of any programs that might be seeing increased funding. For the legislature's priorities, the economy and jobs, in fact, there's a bill that the Senate might be debating tonight that may keep some of our senators from getting to our legislative banquet pertaining to export incentives and some other things. Education, tax reform. Tax reform, you might have heard about Kansas having made some cuts to business and personal income taxes, and there's interest in the Missouri legislature about trying to do something to at least make staying in Missouri more appealing to businesses that might be looking to move to Kansas. Capital improvements bonding, there's a proposal to put out a bond, a $950 million bond, which would have to be approved by voters, but that money could be used for state building improvements, including college and university buildings, park facility maintenance, and some transportation money, although not nearly the kind of money that the 1 cent sales tax would generate. And highway funding, we've already talked about. Workers' compensation. Prevailing wage, you heard Senator Kehoe talk. There's quite a bit of interest in doing something relative to prevailing wage. Right to work, and then lastly, right to firearms. And I know you've all heard a lot about gun control, and you realize that in Missouri you've got some bills on each end of the spectrum, some urban legislators that want to do something to increase gun control, obviously, and a lot of other legislators who want to go exactly the opposite direction. In your packet, you have a yellow page which says bills of interest, and so that's just a sample of some of the bills that we're following in the legislature this year. Some of those I've put up here that we have policy on or have testified on in some cases. That first one on county burn bans, we have a new policy this year, and that was reported in Capital Connection. There was just a hearing on that last week, but we will be working with legislators to try to make that legislation more consistent with our policy. Building codes, drones, that's a new one this year. Firearms, already talked about. Those are some of the ones that are actually supporting the right to have firearms. County extension districts, child ag labor at the federal level last year had the federal proposal that was withdrawn, but in the course of looking into that particular issue, we learned that state statutes were actually more restrictive than what people realized they were. And so Senator Munzlinger and Representative Duggar have introduced legislation to make sure that the state statute is more permissive of the types of things that would typically be done by children on the farm. House Bill 545 is one that did make the news, requiring confiscation of assault weapons. That legislation has virtually no chance. Neither does the next one, which was filed in response to that bill to actually make it illegal for legislators to file gun control legislation. And then firearms safety, that last one, Senate Bill 75, that's one that just has had a preliminary approval in the Senate, and it just says that schools may provide firearms safety training in their schools. In your packet, you also have a white page, which says, MFB legislative priorities, and there are 3 issues on that. When you come to this meeting, we always like to try to give you a one-pager that talks about just the top 3 priorities and ask you to talk to your legislators about those. If you don't get a chance to do that today, hope that you take a chance to make a phone call or send an email later, whatever the opportunity may be to make them aware of our work on these issues. Ballot initiative transparency, you might remember that we worked on this last year, went all the way down, got through the House, got to the last day of session and had a little bit of debate on the Senate. We think that we have addressed the concerns of the people who stopped that legislation last year, and so right now we're working to get it onto the House floor and hopefully out of Senate committee soon. We are working with the Secretary of State's office. Secretary of State Jason Kander will be here tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, to make some comments about this issue, and we've been working with his office and been very pleased with his interest. And also the State Auditor's Office, Tom Schweik, has also been very helpful. He'll be at our banquet tonight. We're also working with the Association of Electric Cooperatives, the Chamber, and the Missouri Association of Counties on this legislation. Career and Technical Education Advisory Council. This started as a little bit of a different proposal that Senator Munzlinger actually came up with in response to all the concerns that came up through the last year and the year before, and as Garrett likes to point out, I think 3 years that he's been fighting on these issues in particular. This legislation would create an advisory group that would hopefully be able to give a little more guidance to DESE and the State Board of Education on how the career and technical education programs need to be supported and to try to keep their prominence in Missouri that they've had for forever. Right to farm and ranch. This is the proposal. It would be a constitutional amendment that Representative Lerner worked on when he was in the legislature, and he was term limited out, but we have had a hearing on this legislation. HSUS attended the hearing. They did not say anything. We were all very surprised, those of us who were there to testify in support. They stayed quiet, but we're sure that they will say something when it gets over to the Senate, where they have a much better chance of stopping it.